Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, as a Patreon request from M. DeMarco, I'm talking about the Gaslamp killer, Instrumentalepathy. Alright, so, the Gaslamp Killer is an alternative hip-hop producer from LA. I never heard of this guy before the request came in, but apparently he was signed to Brainfeeder at one point. He, alongside Flying Lotus and Mainframe, produced the debut album from Ganja Sufi, A Sufi and a Killer. And as you might guess from that title, Gaslamp Killer did the majority of those beats. I'm also told he's opened for Run the Jewels before. And it seems he got a bit of traction with his debut album in 2012, aptly titled Breakthrough. I made sure to listen to that project first before diving into this sophomore project, and that album was something. It's an instrumental hip-hop project of the darkest and edgiest variety, quite experimental and lacking in hooks, but lots of blown out and filtered drum breaks, squealing synths, and psychedelic samples with plenty of world music instrumentation and orchestral string snippets. I'm not gonna act like it's the kind of thing I'd really be excited to revisit. It was rather scattered with lots of short tracks, many of which didn't really get a chance to develop. But, you know, the Gaslamp Killer was able to form his own recognizable identity out of it. It was alright. Was hoping to get something better out of this sophomore effort. Did look more promising with a track listing that had fewer and longer individual tracks, as well as a much cooler looking album cover. But I just kinda jumped in. What did we get with Instrumentalepathy? Well, it's not too far removed from his debut, but I definitely enjoyed it more. This project very much gave me like some early Amon Tobin vibes, maybe a little of Uncle's science fiction, or The Comet is Coming as well. You know, not unlike anything I've ever heard before, but not at all opposed to hearing more stuff like that. And yeah, the longer track lengths made all the difference here. While none of these tracks are exactly catchy, they feel like they flow a lot better and actually allow their vibes to develop. It's a pretty solid project. Not a great one. There are a couple of iffy moments that aren't really my thing that kind of hold it back. But for the most part, yeah, I like this. May as well get into individual tracks. We do get off to a pretty slow start on the opener Pathetic Dreams, featuring some early Tangerine Dream-esque synth work provided by Kid Moxie, some strings from Miguel Atwood Ferguson, he does strings on a lot of different tracks here, and plenty of GLK's own deep humming throughout. Pretty neat ambient-ish piece that does in fact set the general mood of the project, very dark and downbeat stuff. It does kind of drag a bit in spots, but generally it's a grower. And we get the first of the more energetic tracks, Good Morning, featuring lots of banging drum breaks, rough guitar licks, and a heavily distorted and filtered guest vocal performance from Ganja Sufi. I'm not really a fan of his voice here, to be honest. Even if he does fit with the sort of edgy psych rock vibe of the track, well, I don't know if it's his voice or just the heavy distortion on it that kills it for me. Might be a little more the latter. But, you know, not bad stuff. And I do really like how it just seamlessly transitions into Warm Wind Frimpong, a marginally more lighthearted track with a more lively bass line and some lighter and slightly more toned down percussion. Even has some saxophone on it, if not exactly the most present musical element in the mix. Shame that these two tracks are the only two that, like, directly link into each other like that. Well, I suppose technically the next three do sort of link into each other, but, like, there's a fade out in the middle of Residual Tingles, and one of those tracks is just an interlude, so I don't know if that really counts in the same way, but whatever. Anyway, Residual Tingles. That's easily one of the best tracks in the bunch. It's probably the closest a track here comes to having a solid hook. The string section's going up against some pretty awesome vocal flares from Nicky Randa in the background. Sounds awesome. And the tacked down outro is cool. It has a spooky piano performance from Jim Lang. But, I mean, the main track and the outro barely have anything to do with each other, and the outro probably should have just been a part of the next track. The Butcher featuring Muffano, or however you say that. It's a mostly synth and drum machine driven piece, lots of hard-hitting 808s and wailing abrasive synths. This track can get a bit much for me, honestly, kinda unpleasant, not a big personal favorite, but it is one of the loudest and most experimental tracks. Doesn't hurt to have around for the sake of flavor. Same with the mostly meandering interlude Friendship, just kind of weird synth sounds and some voice samples from TV shows or something here and there. Not the kind of track I'd ever be seeking out by itself. Like, I don't know if the project would be that much worse off if it were taken out, but I don't mind it being there either. Then we get Gamma Laser Kill, another louder track with loud, abrasive, buzzing analog synths going up against more satisfying drum breaks from Malcolm Cato and bass lines from Mr. R, MRR, I don't know. More experimental moment that probably went over better for me than The Butcher. Pretty nice. The album's last couple of moments do pick up quite a bit more though. Lifeguard Tower number 22, that has a kind of repetitive and cliched sounding melody that sounds like some kind of castle level in an old Mario game or the theme to a campy kids Halloween TV special, but he goes all the way with it. Like, the dark and edgy synths going up against the lush string section sound really cool. It's a nice track. And then we get the much stronger Haleva featuring Amir Yagmai on guitar and tambura, getting some of that Indian-ish flavor in there, I guess. One of the best sounding tracks in the bunch for sure. And right after that we got Listen for My Whistle, another more ambient-ish track that, like the intro, features a lot of humming and spooky atmosphere, though I think this one went over in a more interesting and engaging way. I like all the violins on this one, and the sparse but thumping and echoing beats kind of have that Square Pusher Wind Scale 2 texture to them. That's a definite highlight. Less so is penultimate track Shred You to Bits. Maybe the most abrasive track in the bunch. First half has some crisp sounding thudding drum breaks care of Shigeto and harsh synth buzzing all over the place. Cool enough, if kind of more headache-inducing for me than anything. And the second half, there's a lot of these sharp, high-pitched synth ringing and like this rambly vocal sample that you think is really gonna build to something, but kind of just sputters out uneventfully. This is apparently the album's ending on the vinyl version, and that's kind of an underbaked closer if you ask me. But thankfully it's not the closer on the digital and CD versions. We instead finish with In the Dark Part 2 featuring the Heliocentrics, a sequel of sorts to the closing track on his debut album, and almost certainly the strongest track on this album as well. It feels like all the moods and vibes explored throughout this album are paid off in the most satisfying way, like in this almost 9-minute psychedelic jam that runs through several instrumental flares from guitars and synths and 70s style electric pianos and more orchestral strings, and it all sounds awesome and has lots of great progressions throughout. That's a much more satisfying ending than the track that preceded it. Also, there's a hidden track that's kind of some more spooky ambience like the opener. Ordinarily, I find these hidden tracks after long silences to be kind of annoying. See my thoughts on Audiker's LP5, but this really isn't that bad. Like, the silence is only about 30 seconds, and the hidden track is a nice addition as well. So yeah, that's Instrumentalepathy. Pretty good project. Definitely has a cohesive vibe that runs through everything, pretty overtly retro stuff that often calls back to the 60s. The synth work is reminiscent of those earliest synth band experiments like Tangerine Dream's Electronic Meditation, or maybe early industrial artists like Throbbing Gristle. Often pretty harsh and abrasive stuff, and not always my thing, but definitely has a flavor to it that I imagine will very much be appealing to other people. The sound design is very cool all the way through, and I like the focus on live instrumentation and analog synth gear, despite it all being crafted to sound like it had all just been sampled from old projects from the 60s and 70s. Maybe in the same vein as Pretty Lights, A Color Map of the Sun. I don't know if it's the kind of thing I'm gonna keep around for a lot of repeat listens in the future. It is kind of a downer, and only certain moments on here really rise up to become properly great for me, but I did definitely have fun with it, and I think it's worth giving a shot. I think I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, linked to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.